This story does not begin with a battle. There was no declaration of war, no speeches, no warning siren. It begins with something so ordinary that it almost feels ridiculous in hindsight. A tree. In August of 1976, on one of the most heavily guarded borders on Earth, a single poplar tree stood between two observation posts. It wasn't special. It didn't mark a boundary. It wasn't planted as a symbol. It simply grew where trees often grow, quietly, slowly, without asking permission. But this tree had a problem. It blocked the view. At the Korean Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ, visibility is everything. Every movement is watched. Every shadow is measured. Every meter of ground is treated like a potential threat. A blocked line of sight isn't an inconvenience. It's a liability. So a small work party was sent to trim it. Not soldiers preparing for not an invading force. Just men with tools, doing routine maintenance in a place where routine barely exists. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand where this happened. The DMZ is not a neutral space. Despite its name, it is one of the most militarized strips of land in modern history. It slices the Korean peninsula in two, frozen in tension since the armistice of 1953. No peace treaty, no resolution, just a ceasefire that never truly ended the war. Every step inside the DMZ is political. Every action is interpreted, and every misunderstanding has consequences. On the morning of August 18th, a joint US-South Korean team approached the poplar tree near the joint security area. Their task was simple: trim the branches so guards could see each other clearly again. They had done similar tasks before. Nothing about this should have been dangerous. But across the area, North Korean soldiers were watching. From their perspective, this was not maintenance. It was intrusion. It was control. It was someone altering the ground without permission. Words were exchanged. Then more soldiers appeared. What happened next took seconds, but it would echo for decades. North Korean guards suddenly rushed the work party. They weren't armed with guns. They were carrying axes, the same tools meant for trimming the tree. In the chaos that followed, 2 American officers were killed. No warning shots. No escalation ladder, just sudden, brutal violence. Captain Arthur Boniface and First Lieutenant Mark Barrett died at the foot of a tree they were sent to prune. And just like that, the Cold War ignited over a piece of wood and leaves. At first, the world barely noticed. Incidents happened in the DMZ. Tensions flared constantly. But inside military command rooms, alarms were already ringing. Because this wasn't just a fight, it was a test. If the deaths went unanswered, it would signal weakness. If the response was too aggressive, it could trigger open war, and both sides knew it. The question wasn't whether to respond, it was how. This is where the story stops being about a tree and becomes about psychology. The United States didn't respond with airstrikes. They didn't send tanks rolling forward. They didn't fire a single shot in retaliation. Instead, they planned something far more deliberate. They decided to finish the job. The tree would come down, but this time the message would be impossible to misunderstand. And before we continue, if you enjoy history told through strange, real moments like this, consider liking the video and subscribing. It genuinely helps us keep bringing these stories to you without turning them into noise. What followed would be one of the largest shows of force since the Korean War itself, not to conquer territory, not to start a battle, but to send a message so clear that it would end the confrontation without a single additional death, all over a tree. What happened next was not anger, it was calculation. Inside US and South Korean command centers, nobody shouted, nobody panicked. Instead, planners asked a single question: how do you respond without starting a war? Because the situation was delicate in a way only the Cold War could be. The Korean peninsula was a pressure cooker. One wrong move could pull China, the Soviet Union, and the United States into a conflict no one actually wanted, but no one could afford to lose face over either. So the response had to do 3 things at once. It had to show strength, it had to avoid bloodshed, and it had to be unmistakable. The solution was simple, almost absurd. They would return to the tree, and they would cut it down completely. But this time, they would do it in a way that left no room for interpretation. The operation was given a name: Operation Paul Bunyan. It sounded harmless. even folksy. It was anything but. At dawn on August 21st, 1976, 3 days after the killings, forces began to move. Not quietly, not discreetly, but openly. Dozens of South Korean soldiers formed a perimeter. U.S. engineers arrived with chainsaws. Above them, attack helicopters circled low and loud. Fighter jets roared in the distance, deliberately visible. Behind them, artillery units stood ready. Infantry units waited just beyond the DMZ. Aircraft carriers were repositioned. Strategic bombers were put on alert. Every piece of this was intentional. This was not about the tree anymore. This was a performance. North Korean guards watched from their posts as the scene unfolded. They could see the helicopters. They could hear the jets. They could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't a threat delivered in words. It was a threat delivered in scale. The chainsaws started. Branches fell. The trunk cracked. The tree that had stood there quietly for years came down in minutes. All the while, North Korean soldiers stood motionless. No one fired. No one rushed forward. No one interfered, because now the message was clear. If you escalate this, we are ready. And then, just as deliberately as they arrived, the forces withdrew. No speeches, no declarations, no victory parades. The entire operation lasted less than an hour, but its impact was enormous. For the first time since the incident, North Korea responded, not with force, but with words. They issued a rare statement expressing regret for the deaths. In Cold War language, this was as close to an apology as you were ever going to get. The crisis ended not with gunfire, but with restraint backed by overwhelming force, and that's what makes this moment so unsettling. Because the world didn't step back from war by calming down. It stepped back by staring directly into it. It's tempting to laugh at this story. A tree, axes, chainsaws, helicopters. It sounds like a joke when you strip it down. But this incident came dangerously close to igniting something much larger. Because the Korean War never truly ended. The armistice signed in 1953 stopped the fighting, but it didn't resolve the conflict. Technically, North and South Korea are still at war to this day. The DMZ exists because no one could agree on peace, only on stopping, which means every incident there exists in a legal and political gray zone. When Captain Boniface and Lieutenant Barrett were killed, it wasn't just murder. It was a violation of an already fragile ceasefire. Had the United States retaliated with force, airstrikes, artillery, even a small incursion, North Korea would have been obligated to respond. That response could have pulled in allies. China had troops stationed nearby. The Soviet Union was watching closely. One misstep could have triggered a cascade. And that's what makes Operation Paul Bunyan so important. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about controlling escalation. The planners understood something crucial. In Cold War conflicts, perception mattered as much as firepower. You didn't just fight armies, you fought narratives. By cutting down the tree under overwhelming protection, but without firing a shot, the US reframed the incident. They showed they would not be intimidated. They showed they would not escalate blindly. And they showed they were fully prepared if escalation came anyway. That balance is incredibly hard to achieve. Too weak, and you invite more attacks. Too strong, and you start a war. Most historical disasters happen when leaders fail to walk that line. This time, they didn't. And that's why this story still gets studied in military academies today. Not because of the violence, but because of the restraint. Poplar tree is gone, but the border remains. The DMZ is still there. Wider, quieter, and more dangerous than almost anywhere else on Earth. It's a place where nothing happens, until suddenly everything could. Soldiers still stand face to face. Binoculars still scan the horizon. Rules of engagement are still measured in inches and seconds. And incidents still happen. Defections, shouting matches, occasional gunfire. What makes the axe murder incident unique isn't that it was violent, it's that it shows how fragile peace really is. Sometimes history turns on speeches, sometimes it turns on battles, and sometimes it turns on a tree blocking someone's view. That's the uncomfortable truth of geopolitics. Wars don't always start with ideology. They start with misunderstandings. with pride, with fear, with people reacting instead of thinking. In 1976, thinking won barely, and the world moved on, unaware of how close it came to disaster because of a tree that no one remembers, in a place no one is supposed to cross.